Imagine, one fright, and you aged 10 years. It all started on an ordinary morning. A man was abruptly awakened by a phone call and momentarily felt panic, his heart pounding, his breathing ragged. He walked to the mirror and froze. His hair had turned gray, his skin sagged, his hands trembling like an old man's. His passport showed his age, but his reflection did not. An hour later, social media exploded with similar stories. Fear was no longer just an emotion. It had become a mechanism of aging, instantaneous and irreversible. Scientists quickly discovered a pattern: every flash of intense fear added years. Mild anxiety, wrinkles. Panic, decades. People began to fear fear itself. The streets filled with silent faces, movements became cautious, conversations short. Laughter was the first to disappear. Even children learned to suppress their emotions, as a fright from a loud sound could turn a teenager into a gray-haired old man in seconds. Medicine proved powerless. Anti-anxiety pills slowed aging, but didn't stop it. Quiet zones emerged, places without news, alarms, or loud noises. There, people spoke in whispers and moved slowly, as if afraid to frighten reality itself. Outside these zones, the world aged faster. Hospitals overflowed with bodies with young birth dates and decrepit bodies. Governments introduced new laws. Bans on frightening news. Bans on horror films. Bans on screaming. Violations were considered an attempt on someone else's life. But fear couldn't be banned. It was born within. People aged, remembering accidents, losses, war. Veterans disappeared faster than anyone. Their past killed them again and again, each time adding years to their bodies. The market adapted instantly. Fearlessness coaches appeared, selling techniques for suppressing emotions. The richest looked younger than everyone else. They could afford silence, security, and control. The poor aged faster. Their lives were full of surprises. Fear became the new currency. Its absence became a luxury. The world was divided not by age, but by the number of fears experienced. Religions changed. Now they taught not faith, but calm. Sermons were wordless, only breathing and rhythm. Panic attacks in temples were considered tragedies. Some sects deliberately frightened their followers, promising rapid aging as a path to wisdom. These people looked ancient, but claimed to have lived their lives faster than others. The main paradox became obvious: the fear of death killed faster than death itself. People stopped taking risks, stopped loving, stopped choosing. The world became safe, but empty. Then those who dared to fear consciously appeared, to embrace fear and age for the sake of moving forward. They were called madmen. But they were still making a difference. A profession emerged among the madmen: fear conductors. They voluntarily navigated danger zones, disasters, and conflicts. Their bodies aged before their eyes, but their minds remained clear. They claimed that fear need not be suppressed, but lived consciously. These people looked 80, though officially 30. Society despised them and simultaneously needed them, because someone had to go first. Gradually, a strange thing became clear: not all fear aged equally. Fear for oneself destroyed the fastest. Fear for others, slowly. And fear, accepted and lived to the end, sometimes left almost no trace. This discovery was hidden. If people stopped fearing for themselves, the system of control would collapse. The news began to frighten again, carefully, in measured doses, so that society would remain manageable and obedient. Children of the new generation were different. They were taught not to avoid fear, but to recognize it. Panic lessons, controlled frightening situations, were introduced in schools. Some children aged several years during the lesson, but then almost completely stopped being afraid. They looked strange, young eyes in old faces. They were called resilient and were feared more than gray-haired old men. The economy collapsed completely when people stopped taking out loans. Fear of the future was too expensive. No one wanted to grow old for the sake of mortgages or promises. Cities froze in their unfinished forms. But in abandoned areas, communities began to emerge where fear was accepted as a part of life. There, life was fast, vibrant, and short-lived. Their bodies aged, but their eyes glowed with life. One day, a man appeared who didn't age from fear at all. He was frightened, persecuted, locked up, to no avail. He remained the same. Scientists decided he was devoid of fear. But he said something else: fear is always there, he just stopped identifying with it. His body no longer paid for the emotion because it no longer possessed him. They were trying to destroy this man. His existence threatened the entire system. If fear ceased to age, control would disappear. But the idea had already spread. People began to notice, the more they resisted fear, the faster they aged. And those who faced it lost less. For the first time in a long time, the world was truly afraid, and that's precisely why it began to change. Over time, fear ceased to be an enemy. It became an indicator of life. People aged more slowly, but lived more honestly. Age no longer frightened them, they feared emptiness. The world was still dangerous, but movement had returned. And it became clear, it's not fear that kills a person. It's running from fear that kills them. When the idea of embracing fear became widespread, the world entered a period of chaos. People no longer hid. They confessed their fears publicly, in public squares, on the airwaves, to each other. Some aged right during their confessions, but then the process slowed. It turned out that the repressed years returned immediately, as if the body were repaying a debt. After this, aging almost stopped. This was more frightening than the previous rules. A new concept emerged: net age. It didn't match the age on your passport and wasn't reflected directly in a mirror. It was felt within. A person could look old but be light, calm, and alive. Or they could be young on the outside but completely exhausted on the inside. People began asking not, "How old are you?" but, "How long have you really lived?" Fear was no longer the same for everyone. Everyone began to age in their own way. Some from loneliness, others from choice, still others from love. There was no longer a universal rule. This destroyed the last illusions of control. The world became unpredictable, but fair. People began to make mistakes again, fall, scream, and live, accepting the price of every feeling. Over time, fear stopped instantly aging. It became a warning. If a person ran away, the years came abruptly. If they stayed, they passed almost imperceptibly. Fear became a choice. And this choice couldn't be delegated to the system, the doctor, or the law. Each person bore it themselves. This proved to be humanity's hardest test. The elderly ceased to be a symbol of the end. They became proof of courage. The most ancient looked frightening, but spoke calmly. They didn't hide from life. They were respected not for their age, but for the number of encounters with fear from which they had not fled. For the first time, old age ceased to be a curse. The world didn't become safe. It became conscious. People still aged, but they knew why. Every year lived had meaning. Every fear had a price. Panic no longer ruled humanity. Now it was understanding. Time passes not from fear, but from a refusal to live. And the main question changed. Not, what are you afraid of, but what are you willing to grow old for? Because in a world where fear ages instantly, only those who choose life, even trembling with terror, remain truly young. Over time, people noticed something strange. Those who aged the fastest weren't those who had experienced catastrophes, but those who had avoided them their entire lives. Their fears had been building for years, finding no outlet, until one day their bodies paid for it all at once. They aged suddenly, without event, without cause, simply from a thought. The world understood, it's not events that break a person, but the endless expectation of the worst. A new type of therapy emerged, living the possible. People were taught to mentally experience worst-case scenarios without running away. Some aged during the sessions, but emerged calmer than ever. They could no longer be frightened. Fear lost its power when it was stripped of its secret. Aging ceased to be a punishment and became the price for being honest with oneself. The most frightening were those who no longer aged at all. Not because they felt no fear, but because they accepted any outcome. They couldn't be blackmailed with the future. They lived without guarantees, but without panic. Society didn't know how to deal with them. People who cannot be frightened become truly free.